an idea for a movie. I got an idea for a movie.
Doesn't everybody?
So, welcome to another new segment of our show that we'll be occasionally bringing in when we have a topic for it, but certainly not every episode. This is Memo to the Executives. This is a spin-off of a series of articles on thinkmcflythink.com that I wrote, basically pitching story ideas for the franchises and sequels of tomorrow that were currently lying in limbo, lying dormant, but just waiting to be reawakened. And most importantly, you don't present your arguments in an arrogant, frustrated, out-of-work screenplay writer kind of way. I was hopefully just presenting my ideas as someone who cares about good stories, looks at a property and thinks it's got real potential as a film series, and says, let's try and figure out a way how you do it. Or maybe it's not worth doing it at all. So that's what we're going to do for you tonight by looking at the possibilities, the pitfalls, the worth of making Ubisoft's coveted video game franchise Assassin's Creed into a film series. Now, the reason that we've chosen Assassin's Creed partly is because we don't know what the heck's happening with it right now. The position of the film is on uncertain ground. It was supposed to be coming out this August. Co-production, I believe, between 20th Century Fox, New Regency, Ubisoft Motion Pictures, whatever the hell that is, and DMC Film, with Michael Fassbender both producing and starring. Now, as far as I know, all those parties are still involved, but the film has no confirmed director, no confirmed final script, no confirmed start date for production. It has a new potential release date of Christmas 2016. We'll see. Let's see right now, you and me, whether it's going to be worth waiting for or even worth making. And joining us to do this is the man with the knowledge, the intel, the info, the background data, and in this case, very specifically, a man who has read one of the official screenplays for this movie to be. Well, certainly not the last one. Mr. Matt Thompson. Hello, sir.
Hey, Phil, and just for the people at home who are now tired of hearing me on this podcast, yes, I have incriminating photos of Phil. No, I am never going away. Sorry to let you guys know that.
It's episode 2, Matt. I think we could save that joke until at least mid-season, but that's alright. It's true. It's true. Now, Matt, if that is true, let me get some payback. Unfortunately, you knew this was coming. We cannot assume that our viewers have played the games and the unique and complicated nature of the game's story is going to be new to them. So, and that story is going to have a bearing on everything we discuss tonight. So we should very briefly explain what these games are about. Do you want to take this or shall I?
How about this? I'll attempt to do it, and then you can attempt to do it, and somewhere in the middle we'll find some of the story.
I think the writers of the game had that very same conversation. Yes, you go ahead.
So, the question is, where do you start? Well, there was a civilization, a first civilization of, what were they, godlike beings or something with special DNA. And now, in the present day, a company called Abstergo, who are really made up of evil people called Templars, have accessed that DNA and have a machine called the Animus, where you have genetic memories from that DNA of your ancestors, and you can go in the machine and relive their memories or something, so they can find special objects or something. Look, I just like killing people.
Okay, Assassin's Creed The Plot Take 2, I guess. I'll have a crack at this. So basically, folks, Assassin's Creed is a series of games that always take place at all points in two distinct time periods, at some unique and special point in history, and also in the not-too-distant future. At all times, it is about this secret war which has always been carrying out throughout the centuries between the Templars, who are always portrayed in media as evil people who want to enslave us and control our minds and our actions and all of that, and the Assassins, a secret sect of freedom fighters, I guess you'd say, the Rebellion, who want to defeat the Templars. Now, the Templars' goal is to enslave us and control us by dominating our minds, and they're going to do this by finding these magical doohickeys called Pieces of Eden, which are spread around in various places. And the Pieces of Eden were left by an alien civilization which actually created all life. It wasn't God, it wasn't anything like that. It wasn't even a Big Bang, it was aliens who basically created everything, the life, the universe and everything, and they left these Pieces of Eden. And these special pieces of Eden, of course, because they're alien technology, need no explanation. They're just wonderful and magic, and they control all life and control our minds. But the problem is, Templars don't know where the fuck they are. So, what they have to do in the present, under the guise of their corporation, Abstergo Industries, is they basically have this device called the Animus. The Animus basically allows somebody to go back in time and relive the memories of one of their ancestors. And the way that the Abstergo want to find the Eden is basically by kidnapping a guy called Desmond, who's one of the dullest characters in the history of video games. But the only thing that makes Desmond interesting is that he is an assassin, and his ancestors were assassins, and much more interesting people. So Abstergo kidnaps Desmond, hooks him up to the Animus, and Desmond replays his past lives and goes through wonderful time periods, the Crusades, the Renaissance in Italy, and even the American Revolution. And hopefully by reliving those memories, Abstergo will be able to locate the Eden. But of course, for purposes of commerce, Ubisoft keeps making games and still are. So as you can imagine, folks, they still haven't found much, and they still haven't taken us over yet. That's the basic conceit, and certainly the first game takes place in the time of the Crusades, when Desmond gets to live the life of his ancestor Altair, who is an assassin who basically fights the Templars in the time of the Crusades. And it's not much of a story really in that first one, but I think the point is that fans of the game and the game's story would naturally assume that the first film would follow the first game, that it was going to be a Crusades epic. We've had those before, and Fassbender would play the dual role of Desmond and hopefully make him a far more interesting character, and he would also play Altair. So, Matt, was that in the script you read?
No, it was not. I can say this. I'm actually very curious to see if Fassbender will be playing both the modern-day fellow, who is not Desmond, but is in fact named Michael Kelly in this script, and the assassin, who is not Altair, but is part of the Spanish Inquisition and named Pedro Torres. It deals with a villain who was apparently in Assassin's Creed 2. I keep forgetting Assassin's Creed. His name is Torquemada, or something like that. The idea generally is that Michael Kelly, who is Fassbender, is a bad guy. In an interesting move, our likable hero is introduced knocking over an armored car, but not just robbing it. He actually executes one of the guards inside, gets out, sees a dude on the side of the road, and then executes him. So he is captured, and in a very similar way to Terminator Salvation of all things, we see him executed. Lethal injection, executed, fade to white. But instead of dying, he wakes up at Abstergo Industries. And we have two characters, one of whom is named Joseph Truman, and his assistant named Eve, who seem very clearly based on the Vidic and Lucy characters from the first game, but aren't them for some reason, who give out the general layout from the game of, we can go through your memories, there are past patients and subjects, don't ask about them, haha, clearly nothing went wrong. So we send him back, and then Michael wakes up in the body of Pedro, who in the Spanish Inquisition, and we do the typical Assassin's Creed thing where Pedro's family is horrifically killed, and he becomes an assassin. And like the games, it's all about tracking down a glowy, all-powerful object called an Apple of Eden. And, you know, that sounds relatively simple, but the script is a complete nightmare of jumping back and forth between time periods, of trying to take game concepts. Like in the video game, for the people who haven't played it, there's a thing called synchronization, which is basically the game's way of stopping you from murdering innocent people. So oddly enough, the script tries to do that with this concept where while Pedro is doing everything, see that Michael is sort of beside him watching him, and Michael has to mimic his movements, and that if Michael does something different, he's desynchronized. It's a very, very odd concept, and the script never really latches onto it. But the weird thing is, it's a very long script. It's about 140 pages. It's complicated. You have a hero who's not terribly likable. You have a villain who's not terribly interesting. The Spanish Inquisition is an interesting time period, but plot-wise, it essentially amounts to, hey, we're looking for this glowy thing. Go find this guy. They find that guy who gives a slight monologue about what the glowy thing could do and says, go find this person. So they go and they find that person who gives another monologue about another thing about the glowy object, and he says, go find this person over there. And it's just a series of that repeatedly over and over and over again. For a film called Assassin's Creed, there isn't much in the way of assassinating.
Oh, man. I mean, we should, just so we can explain a little bit further, for those of you who haven't played the first game, it was one of those games that I feel is a lot easier to admire than to actually like. I certainly spent a lot of time throwing my controller at the screen during that game, because it is not inherently cinematic in any way. Basically, you have a lot of sequences where Desmond is in the offices of Abstergo, and the villain, I guess you would say, the Templar scientist, Dr. Vidic, and his assistant, spend a lot of time talking to Desmond in scenes that you cannot skip. And then you will go to the Crusades, where Altair will basically get a briefing on who he needs to assassinate by his master in scenes that we cannot skip. And then Altair will basically ride off in scenes that have no shortcut. He will ride all the way to Jerusalem, wherever he needs to go, and then he will get another mission briefing from a guy in a shop in scenes that you cannot skip. And then he will go and assassinate somebody, and that guy who he assassinates will have a very long death scene in a scene that you cannot skip.
Oh god, that threw me so much the first time I played Assassin's Creed. Why am I in this computer construct talking to this man who I've just clearly stabbed to death? Why is he speaking to me? What is going on?
Well, it was a big twist. It was a big surprise. People who bought the game, it's hard to imagine there was a time when we didn't know what Assassin's Creed was. But when people first bought that game, it was a big twist, and nobody knew. And I guess it was meant. I accepted it because I thought, okay, this is Ubisoft basically trying to deconstruct the video game. You see, one of the things that a friend of mine, Justin Korthoff, who works in the video game industry, what he taught me was that video games are basically about the constant battle between player freedom and player restriction. For example, why can't you make a great Superman game? Well, one of the reasons is because Superman is all-powerful. If you give a player control of Superman, they will immediately fly off to the moon and throw it at the Earth. That's what they will do, because they will expect to be able to do that. But unfortunately, games, when they work, actually thrive on restriction. They give the player the illusion of freedom, but they place lots of roadblocks in the way to make sure that they can't just do whatever they want. Sometimes it's something as bad as an invisible wall. You think you can go to scenery in the distance, and you actually can't. In the case of Assassin's Creed specifically, like Matt was saying, it's the desynchronization, which, at best is not really a bad thing. It makes sense. You have to do what you're told, and you can't just kill whoever you want. At worst, it's if you step to the left by a centimetre during this mission, we will send you right back to the start of the mission. You
took a bad step tailing this guy. Do it again.
You play the game the way we want you to play it, and it's fucking abysmal. It's really, really interesting. I'm flabbergasted, Matt, that synchronization is actually part. This is a game concept. This is about Ubisoft played with the format of games within Assassin's Creed, and I understood it. I got it. They were breaking the fourth wall, so to speak. They were basically, you are playing a video game, and the character you're playing is playing a video game inside the Animus when he is reliving the memories, and they've played that up, and I get it, and sometimes it's smart and clever, and sometimes it's just pretentious, but I accept it for what it is. And I knew that the obviously present day sections and the historical sections would be in the film. I mean, it's just a part of the story, and people would be right in the streets, or maybe not, if that wasn't represented. But the idea that they really go in the whole hog and including game glitches in a film? Really? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, it's exactly that. Michael will mess up. He will be desynced. Pedro will jump. Michael will not. He'll be desynced. It's just... It flabbergasts me. It's not so much that I'm against importing game concepts. You can be cute about it. I mean, there are leaps of faith in the script, which is kind of a cute thing. Although nobody jumps into a hay bale, which is really disappointing to me.
That's heresy.
Yeah, they jump into water, but no hay bales. Maybe if we get a sequel. I don't understand the reasoning of it. Why you would be so completely... Why you would treat it as such sacred text in one way and yet throw everything out in another. It feels like they're ditching the things that work and keeping the things that don't.
Well, I think that it addresses one of the main riddles that has plagued the video game film adaptation genre. It's a riddle I'm still not sure we know the answer to. Is it best to make a straight adaptation of the game story and be respectful, since that story is the reason you're making or trying to make a movie in the first place? Or do you take inspiration from the ideas in the game, maybe not all of them, but some of the ideas in the game, and use them to craft your own story? I mean, clearly it's not working in this case, but what do you say, Matt? Should this have been a straight adaptation set in the Crusades, or should it be set in a different place?
I think you could do both. I mean, Assassin's Creed has enough interesting time periods you could make it work. My problem with this script, and what generally I try to look at to try to keep an even mind of the whole thing, is if there was no Assassin's Creed video game, and this was an original thing, and you're trying to make the best movie possible, would you make these choices? And I cannot in a million years think they would make them.
I will say that you shouldn't make a straight adaptation. My problem with adapting any last-gen or current-gen video game into a film is that the line has become so blurred between video games and movies. Video games have Hollywood production values. In the best instances, they have the perfect actors as voice talent, they have amazing composers to do the music, brilliant writers, the cutscenes are directed like a scene in a film, and so many games today give ownership of the story to the player, whether it's choosing a dialogue option or choosing your plan of attack and taking out an area of bad guys. The player is the writer and director. And not to mention, games have all the advantages of books and TV and being able to take as long as they want to tell a story. Translating that to film has no advantages. There is no evolution of the material. You can't even say that there would be a buzz in seeing a game translated into live action. The games are getting so good in terms of graphics that the characters are practically flesh and blood. You don't get a chill when you're seeing, Bob Hoskins in a Super Mario costume. It's different now. We've moved on. So I think it's folly to make a movie on these properties, with some very rare exceptions. One of them being Assassin's Creed. That's why we're doing this. And that's because the first game has a very intriguing plot and a very intriguing setting, but like I discussed, it's just not a cinematic game at all. Nowhere near like its sequels. I think when we talk about sequels, then things get a little bit trickier. But the first game has just really clunky, I wouldn't even call them cutscenes. Characters just stand still for 10 minutes delivering exposition. It has no cutscenes. It has no cinematic flair. And it barely has a plot. I mean, it's basically your master tells you to go here and assassinate a guy, and you do that, and eventually you'll have enough stars on your belts that he will say, now you're ready to take out the main bad guy. That is literally it. So I think you can take the bare bones of the story that's in that first game and have the freedom to make a movie. I mean, I truly believe you could, and I think that's the assumption that we all operated on. I don't know what you feel.
No, that's absolutely it. I felt like they would sort of take the basics of Assassin's Creed and run and do their own thing with it.
It seems to me that the main problem you would have in adapting Assassin's Creed 1 is, first of all, nobody likes Desmond. He's a very, very dull character. And not many people like Altair either, because he's a very, stiff character.
I will say Pedro seems to be a little bit closer to an Ezio than an Altair.
That was my point. The fact that if you want to do a literal adaptation of the series, the problem is things don't start getting good until the second game with the introduction of Ezio Mario Auditore, who I've always loved. This is the game that takes place in Italy during the Renaissance, folks, and that was when I got into the series. And the reason why, I don't know if you had this reaction, Matt, I always felt playing Ezio, not only is he like a cool kind of romantic Zorro-esque figure, but I also felt like I was playing the world's first superhero, like a prototype Batman. And this is a guy who, as you progress through the game, you get cooler and cooler stuff, you buy better armor, you buy better gadgets. Leonardo da Vinci himself builds you a fucking flying machine, and he and obviously a lot of, Da Vinci's designs obviously played into the Batman lore, so I really felt like I was playing the prototype 15th century Batman, and that's why in the second game and in the third game, Brotherhood, I really got into it. I just loved being Ezio. Everyone loves being Ezio. He's still probably the favorite character protagonist in the series, and frankly I always just thought, even before you told me about this, Matt, and told me about Pedro, and I can't believe, by the way, folks, I know it's been a long time since Napoleon Dynamite, I still don't think you can have a protagonist called Pedro. It just doesn't work for me. I'm just going to be smiling the whole time, but that's just me. But I just feel like they're going to want to, yes, they're going to want to adapt the first game, but they're going to want to skip straight to Ezio. So is that what they've done?
A little bit. He's not nearly as charming as Ezio is, but he has a very similar backstory. I never finished 2, but like you, Phil, I liked it considerably more than the first game. Ezio was a much more enjoyable protagonist. He was fun. He was charming. The gameplay was so much better. But I made it about 25 hours into 2, and I kind of just let it go because I felt like I'd peaked in terms of what I was interested in. So I'd given up on the games for a while, and then I got Black Flag, which, for the people who don't know, is a pirate game. And pirate games are awesome. Black Flag, like Assassin's Creed 2, and I think like the best of these games, has a very charming, fun protagonist. Edward Kenway in Black Flag, he's a bit like Ezio. He's a little more free-carrying. He doesn't have the tragic backstory. But he's a fun person to be around. And I feel like they're trying to do that with Pedro, but he's still very... The dialogue, there's no spark to the dialogue. He has sort of a love story with another assassin named Maria, but it doesn't work. I'm very disappointed, especially since the draft I read was written by Scott Frank, who is a writer that I very much respect. There's no spark to anything. Ezio had a spark. Edward in Assassin's Creed Black Flag had a spark. Pedro does not, as much as they try to give him one.
I have just realised an inherent problem that's going to be in this series, and why it very may well be folly to make it at all. And it depends really what your perspective is on this. But let me air this out, folks. If we're dealing with a story where your present-day character, for most of the screen time of the movie, is hooked up to a machine and replays the memories of his ancestor, you know that ancestor's never gonna die. He's never gonna lose. He's never gonna be in mortal danger. So that inherently removes conflict from the story. I only say that with reservation because, yes, you can say that about any comic book fucking movies that come out these days, or a James Bond movie. It's not really a problem for me, but it's going to be a nitpickety problem for a lot of people who who watch a movie that I ain't going to be worried for Pedro at all.
Just to go to the writing of it, so the whole script, they're chasing after the Apple of Eden, which is basically, in this game, is like a glowing orb, and if you touch it, basically it says you can control the minds of those around you. Well, as Pedro and Maria are going to have the final battle against Torquemada, who has the Apple of Eden, the game makes its first reference to the first civilization, saying, "Oh, we believe that we have ancestors who are more powerful than us, and that if you have the blood from them, the apple cannot affect you." Just out of nowhere. They say this literally right before the final battle is starting. Just introducing that concept right then, just so that Pedro isn't affected by the apple. It takes the stakes away. Why not go dramatic and have, Torquemada wants Pedro to kill Maria, but Pedro fights it because he's a true hero and blah, 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 blah. That would be bullshit, but it would be dramatically interesting, as opposed to, oh, by the way, you're immune to the bad thing we've been chasing because reasons.
Well, I'm trying to think here, Matt. I'm trying to think how would I make it work? Because let's not nitpick. Let's come up with solutions. But every time I think of a solution, I just think, no, Matrix. You can't have a situation. Like, I'm trying to think. Okay, is there a way where basically you can have a real threat where it's not that whoever in the Animus is reliving those memories and they've already happened, but no, they're actually not. They're making them happen. They're actually taking control of the body of their ancestor. And if they make a mistake, they're gonna die. Or if they get caught in the in history, they get a cut in the real world. But no, we can't do that. That's not gonna work either, is it? I think the only thing that I am really really fond of is Matt. I've experienced all of the games as they've come out, but one of the things that I really really like in Black Flag is that there is a real element of fun, not just in the historical context, the pirate world, but there's also, believe it or not, fun in the real world, because in Black Flag, folks, we get away from the boring Desmond storyline. Instead, you play as you. And what Ubisoft does, and it's really brilliant, I feel, is that they basically put you in what they imagine would be your dream job. You basically get to play as this guy who gets hired by Abstergo Entertainment. I love it. The Templars rebrand themselves as a video game company, and they basically have the most amazing office that you've ever seen, and they invite you to basically be a playtester for their latest game. They've turned the Animus into a video game console, and their latest game is the Adventures of Edward Kenway the Pirate. Arr! And you're going to play test it, and you basically, every time you play the game, you basically just get out of your bed, because they give you a wonderful little pod apartment, and then you go to your office, which is your little plot, to play the game, and you just play the game, and it's absolutely friggin' awesome. And I loved just wandering around the offices, and I just thought, you know what, this is my dream job. I'd love to work here. Even though I'm being enslaved by the Templars, I'm really, really enjoying it. It's fantastic. So I was thinking for the movie that they should do that. Let's not have the okay, if we want to make it Desmond or this serial killer guy or whatever, but have it be in that context. Have it be in the context of a guy who's a video game tester, and someone who'll become a hero later on down the line. Someone who basically gets their dream job and then has to give it all up because something far more important is happening, because the assassins need his help. I was thinking out loud, maybe that would be a great way to start the first movie. The first movie's got to be light and fun. The template holds. You've got to have the first. If you're going to make a franchise out of this, you don't start with fucking 2 murders, Matt. You have to start with light and fun and then get serious and dark later on. Don't you believe that?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest issues in the script. There are no stakes. I mean, you mentioned the idea of Pedro not being in danger, which is true. It didn't really occur to me reading it, but that's true. But I don't like Michael very much. What's the worst that happens? Michael dies? I saw him get executed 10 pages in. Mm-hmm. Just what's the concern? Even the Templars aren't terribly well set up. I'm wondering, if you haven't played the games, if you're going to have any idea what a Templar is. Because I haven't really mentioned this. Not only is this the first game, but at the end they try to mindfuck you in terms of when you're in the Animus and when you're not.
Ah.
And it just gets very layer after layer, and it's not in a cool, oh my god, I picked this up. It's, really, we're doing this again? Really? Just the Templars are never set up as a particularly good threat. There's a point where Pedro flat out calls the assassins on the hypocrisy of being assassins who kill people and blah, 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 blah. And the script's just like, haha, yeah, but whatever, just go.
And I've just realised, Matt, that even if you go through the hook of using the Animus as entertainment, like this wonderful tool where you get to, relive historical memories but treat it as a game, that's very Total Recall-esque. And that's going to immediately bring memories of that. So you don't think of these things as comparisons when you're playing the game, because you don't see necessarily the filmic influences of it. I actually feel like Assassin's Creed as a franchise is one of those rare series which isn't overly consumed by film references. So you feel like it could work as a film, but the more I actually think about the logistics of it, the more I realise this is a bad idea. Like, for example, that's why I will never believe that Uncharted will be made as a film. I won't believe it. It's not going to happen.
Oddly enough, I have the script for Uncharted. I just haven't read it yet.
I'm well, good luck with that. I bet it's not 140 pages.
No, it's about 120.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Makes sense.
No, I don't know. I still feel like Uncharted is the easier film to make, probably because, as you're saying, it's the one that's clearly been influenced by so many movies. That it's just, oh, we're doing that thing, and we're doing that thing, and we're doing that thing too. But, Assassin's Creed, man. Assassin's Creed.
Well, folks, I think we've answered one part of the equation. Would this work as a good film? I say no. I think Matt's saying no, it's just not going to work. But that doesn't mean that the film's not going to get made. So let's just look at the other part of the equation, which is the actual economics of it, the legitimacy of making it. Is it a viable brand to make a movie that's going to sell lots and lots of tickets? Well, here's the other big problem that I always find kills these video game movies. Because, folks, for every one that gets made, one doesn't. Actually, 3 don't, if you really think about it. The other big problem that just kills these video game movies, either at the box office or just in development hell, is timing. I always find that these projects, they get momentum when one of the games comes out and it's a huge hit and makes like 500 million in a single week, and the film rights are sold and everything gets put together. In the normal time it would take to launch a potential franchise, a couple of years, but by the time that they're ready to make the movie, the timing's wrong. The game series is, at best, not as popular as it used to be. At worst, it has run itself into the ground. Now, I'm still trying to figure out where Assassin's Creed is at that particular moment on that scale. I don't know how well Unity has sold, but I can tell you this, folks. And I know, by the way, I would like to point out that I've certainly seen that people have enjoyed Unity. I know there are people out there that have enjoyed the game and feel like it is getting hugely over-trashed, but you can't deny the perception of it among gamers. It has become a byword for a rushed game that is full of bugs on release, has nothing but regurgitated ideas from the series' past games, has a story that we could care less about at this stage, and it all stems from Ubisoft's insistence on cranking out a new Assassin's Creed game every single year. As far as we know, they're not stopping. They'll have another one out this fall, set in Victorian England, and I'd like to think that the sales on that one will be abysmal, a series low, because the public have been so burned on Unity. And I just don't see a future, Matt, where Assassin's Creed the movie comes out exactly 1 year after the latest game in the series has suffered the worst sales in the franchise history. I just don't see it. What about you?
Well, the key is I think the success with making video game movies is to not make them for the fans of the game. It's kind of like comic book films. Those are hugely, hugely successful movies. You know, think how many people saw The Avengers who have never read an Avengers comic book. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with video games. You can't make the movie for the fans, because if you do, you're completely limiting your audience. Assassin's Creed, this script feels like it's being made for fans of the game. I would say most of the video game films that I've seen feel like they're being made for fans of the game. You need to ignore that. Assume they're probably coming anyway if they're that attached to the property, and then make it for everyone else. In terms of sales, you know, I just looked in terms of the sales. It looks like Assassin's Creed follows a typical kind of movie thing where they made Assassin's Creed 3, which was a huge hit, but people weren't huge on it. Black Flag came out, dropped in sales, but people loved it. It looks like Unity's probably going to outsell Black Flag.
Of course.
But at the same time, if you follow that trend, Victory's probably dropping again. So, again, you need to make the movie for most moviegoers, and most moviegoers have not played Assassin's Creed. My gut instinct, and obviously no one would ever do this, is if you want to take Assassin's Creed and you want it to work as a film, you have to ditch the modern day storyline. That's just, in terms of making a worthwhile film on its own, as its own thing, I feel like it has to be set completely in whatever age they want to set it. Seriously, I really feel like the Animus is what makes the concept very close to unfilmable. You have to ditch that if you want it to work as a movie.
Well, let me ask you the $1 million question to wrap up here, Matt. Do you think this film's going to get made?
I think at some point there will be an Assassin's Creed movie. I don't know if it will be this or with Fassbender. I feel like it's such a valuable brand that inevitably, yes, someone will make some movie called Assassin's Creed. But I don't think it's going to be this.
And unfortunately, I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to say no. Halo did not get made. BioShock did
What
not
do you
get
call Halo Nightfall, sir?
I don't know what to call it. Nothing polite, I guess, but it's certainly not a feature film. But by the way, folks, seriously, there is. We always do end these segments with a little bit of a plug, and I would like to plug a book that is available right now, which I didn't go into with many expectations, but I thoroughly recommend it. It's a book called Generation Xbox: How Video Games Invaded Hollywood. It is a fantastic book. The chapter on Halo the movie alone and why that movie did not get made is worth buying the book for just in itself. But it is a wonderful look at just how integrated video games and movies have been since the creation of video games itself. I won't hijack the discussion to talk about it now, but really check out that book. It's like $14 right now on Amazon. You really should buy it, folks. It's
$10 on Kindle.
There you go, folks. There you go. If you don't care about, hardback literature, buy it on your Kindle. See if I care. That's absolutely fine. But I do believe that Assassin's Creed will join the pantheon of Halo and BioShock. And heartbreaking as it is to say, probably Mass Effect. And certainly Uncharted, in my opinion. And a whole bunch of movies video game movies that will not get made. It will be interesting to see, but I just don't think it's going to happen. So, on that depressing note, we will wrap on that point, but at least we were honest, folks. But it doesn't matter what we think. What do you think? We want to know. How do you think, first of all, do you think it can get made? Do you think it should get made? And if it is going to get made, what is going to be the in that makes it work for you? A straight adaptation or a Pedro? You tell me what happens.
How do you feel about your hero being someone who's introduced murdering people?
Vote Pedro. That's all I've got to say. Vote Pedro.
If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams will come true.
I got an idea for a movie.
Doesn't everybody?